Okay, to give you guys a little bit of background on this story, it was introduced to me by my best friend, who is also a giant Aizawa fan. If you don't know what that means, go explore My Hero Academia for a while and you will run into the term. We fangirled over this story so incredibly hard because it was so funny and such a perfect example of this kind of particular story. This is almost all a chat fic, which I usually avoid like the plague because I hate working around the names. However, you all made me do Shut Up and Dance With Me, which has large sections of chat, so I'm very used to it by now, so I decided, what the heck, I'm going to dive in and do this one anyway, because it consistently makes me laugh. It is just a very good example of Aizawa and what I think chat fics should be, which is not existing off in their own little universe where it mainly talks about memes and whatnot, but actually feels like it's blended right into the story, and this is a perfect example of that. So without further ado, Listening Fanfiction presents Don't Call Me Maybe by Andai. Based on the anime and manga series Boku no Hero Academia or My Hero Academia. Narrated for you by Sierra Feast. Chapter 1. It begins. The classroom, for once, is silent. All the kids had just finished taking a test, and after Kaminari had turned in the final test up to Aizawa's front desk, the rest of the students who had been resting their heads on their desks or reading or doing something on their phones, they'd been through far too many real-life adult experiences by this point to have him take away their phones like children, and slowly began to pack away their things and wake up in preparation for the next lesson. As they all got ready for the next class, however, one thing became obvious. Aizawa's face. It was a face no one had really seen on him before, and considering the range of situations they'd been in over the past year alone, that was actually saying quite a lot. The students had seen him enraged and impassive, and even overjoyed. What else would you call the small smirk that appeared at the corner of his mouth whenever he spotted a cat or saw All Might trip over his too long trousers? But this was new. This was eyes narrowed, fingers steepled under his chin, low grumbling Aizawa. This was glare sweeping across the class, settling on each and every increasingly nervous student before moving on Aizawa. This was unnerving even Bakugo in silence, Aizawa, and as anyone who's ever come into contact with him can attest, doing anything to silence Bakugo is quite a feat. A few minutes passed by with this continuing, and more than few students fearing a repeat of the class-wide expulsion he'd performed the year prior, before Ida rose a slightly trembling hand into the air. Aizawa focused his stare on him, and the boy took that as a non-verbal permission to ask his question. "Sensei?" he tested, almost waiting for his homework teacher to somehow explode. "What?" Aizawa suddenly slammed his hands down on the desk, interrupting Ida's question and causing the entire class to flinch as he stood abruptly and caused his chair to make a screeching sound against the linoleum floor. He gave a small, quick nod, as if to reassure himself he was doing something correctly, before turning around and grabbing a piece of chalk. "All right, problem children," he drawled with more intensity than usual. "Pay attention, because I'm only going to say this once." Having successfully drawn the attention of the entire class, he continued. "While you're not children, you're not exactly adults either." Ignoring the few sounds of protestation that came from some of his students, he went on. "If this past year is anything to go by, and I hope to God it isn't, it's better to play it safe than sorry. There have been too many times you've encountered unreasonably dangerous situations and been unable to reach a hero you're familiar with." At this, Shoda looked intensely but understandingly at Midoriya, who had subconsciously started rubbing his throat, looking uncomfortable, as he likely recalled encountering Shigaragi in the mall on the shopping trip before the even more disastrous summer camp. "So," Aizawa sighed, beginning to write a series of numbers on the board, watching the students' eyes widen as they realized the information he was giving them. "Please, don't be idiots." He sighed as he set the chalk back down, wiping his hands on his tracksuit regardless of the white fingerprints the chalk dust left on the black fabric. He turned around and internally groaned as he saw some of the devilish smirks coming from some of his students.
I'd like to remind you that calling any emergency service, including a hero, without reasonable cause is a felony that will prohibit you from obtaining your hero's license.
Aizawa warned, watching some of the grins be wiped off some of his students' faces. As the tick-tacking of phones eventually ceased, Aizawa's face softened as he looked around at the faces of the problem children who'd weaseled their way into his life over the course of the semester and were sure to continue to do so over the next 2 years.
That being said,
he continued in a far less harsh tone,
I'm not just a pro hero, as much as I might hate it.
He didn't.
You've always held your way into my day-to-day life, so while I expect you to contact me in case of an emergency, I'm also willing to help if there's something less severe that you think appropriate to contact me over.
Ignoring the light ahs and he cares about us, Aizawa huffed and picked up his lesson plan for the day, then grabbed an eraser and wiped his cell number from the chalkboard, preparing for the next lesson and hoping against all hope he hadn't just made a mistake.